Part 5. How to Lose an Empire in 3 Unhinged Decisions. The second triumvirate might have been one of the greatest power trios in history, but they weren't exactly known for making smart decisions. But how did that trio end up on the throne of Rome anyway? Well, let's get into it. Augustus had died peacefully in his sleep in 14 AD after a reign of 43 years. As the first emperor of Rome, he brought stability and prosperity to a huge swath of the Mediterranean world. And while he was far from perfect, there was no denying he'd done a decent job overall. But who would succeed him? Well, being the careful planner that he was, Augustus had actually set up a bit of a system for this. The Senate would put forward a candidate for the position, and then Augustus had the final say in approving that person or not. And so, pretty much all the senators were throwing their support behind a man named Agrippa Postumus, Augustus's grandson and the son of his deceased son, Gaius Caesar. So everything seemed to be going according to plan. That was until Tiberius came along. So that was decision 1. Starting a civil war and murdering 2 members of your own family to try and steal the throne. Let's see if the other 2 are any less unhinged. In 06 AD, the scale of the conflict had grown large enough that the emperor himself, Tiberius, had to come out of retirement and personally lead the Roman legions against the Jews. One of his generals, however, was a certain Pontius Pilate, who may sound familiar to you. See, Pilate was the governor of Judea from 26 to 36 or 37 AD, and he became infamous for his role in the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. It's important to note, though, that this story comes from non-Roman sources, namely the Christian Gospels. And so there's always the possibility that these stories about Pilate were exaggerated, or even completely fabricated. Regardless, the Jewish revolt that Pilate helped put down was very real. And when Rome won, thousands of Jews were crucified and Judea was placed under direct imperial rule. But this wasn't the end of the conflict. You see, Rome's victory was short-lived because the Jews had another trick up their sleeves. Their plan was to conquer Rome itself. No, seriously. See, around 100 miles from Rome is the volcanic island of Capri, which Tiberius had used as a retreat for quite some time. And in 26 AD, he decided to turn it into a luxurious pleasure boat. To achieve this, he chained 4 towers together, each of which were 300 feet tall, and then filled in the gaps between them with marble and gold leafing. The result was an enormous floating palace that could house Tiberius and all of his mistresses and still have plenty of room left over for banquets and chariot races. It was basically the Love Boat meets the Titanic. Anyway, when news reached Rome that the Jews were planning to attack the port of Ostia and take over the city, Tiberius took his entire fleet of luxurious yachts to protect it, all except for one, his favorite, the one that he'd spent so much money converting into a palace, which he left in the care of 2 men while he went to lead the defense. In hindsight, this may have been Tiberius's first unhinged decision, leaving the most valuable ship in the entire fleet unguarded. But his second unhinged decision was right around the corner. See, as soon as word got back to the Jewish rebels that Tiberius had abandoned his post, they attacked. But rather than find a way to board the ship and plunder it, they simply burned it to the waterline. So there goes decision 2, losing the entirety of your navy to a few thousand ragtag rebels. But maybe Tiberius would be able to rebound and win the war. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like that happened either, because we don't have much information about what happened after the loss of the fleet. But we can assume that the war probably didn't go well, because only one of Tiberius's favorites survived, and he ended his life in disgrace shortly after the war. And that brings us to our third and final unhinged decision. See, despite having lost the vast majority of his navy to rebels, Tiberius still managed to stay in power, although his rule became increasingly tyrannical and paranoid. For example, he enacted a policy of killing former friends and advisors to eliminate anyone who knew too much about his past and could use that knowledge to blackmail him. But despite the fact that he was one of the worst emperors Rome ever had, the Senate never turned on him and the people never revolted. But that was about to change. In 37 AD, Tiberius officially abdicated the throne, leaving it to his adopted son, Gaius Caesar. Now, whether or not he did this willingly is up for debate, but many historians argue that he was essentially held hostage by his own wife, Julia, and her grandmother, Livia, who wanted the throne for themselves. But the strange part is that when Tiberius stepped down, he didn't leave Rome to enjoy his retirement. Instead, he headed to the island of Capri, where he lived in a secluded pleasure boat. Why he chose to live here instead of anywhere else has never been confirmed, but it's generally agreed that he just liked the island. However, this lasted only 3 years because in 41 AD, Gaius was declared an enemy of the Roman people and executed on the orders of his grandmother, Livia. And now, whether or not she ordered the execution directly or just gave permission for it to happen is debated. But the fact remains that both Livia and Gaius wound up dead within the span of 3 years. And this opened up the gates of hell for the Julio-Claudian dynasty. That's because the throne was passed to Tiberius's other son, Caligula, who was easily one of the most debauched and depraved emperors in Roman history. We're talking orgies on public chariots, whipping women with leathers, and throwing gold coins at a tower just for fun. It's honestly kind of disgusting, but also impressive considering how rich he was. But either way, this utter degeneracy combined with his senatorial opposition eventually led to his assassination in 55 AD. From there, the Julio-Claudians continued to die violently. First, it was Nero in 68 AD, and then it was Galba in 69 AD, and then it was Otho in 69 AD, and then it was Vitellius in 69 AD, and then it was Vespasian in 79 AD. Okay, I lied. It was just Vespasian, but the point remains, Rome was descending into chaos. Now, to be fair, none of that was really on Tiberius, but his actions certainly didn't help matters. And so that's why I'm giving him the crown for today's episode. Rome fell into decline thanks to a string of inept and unhinged emperors, but they weren't the only ones. Click here to watch how the Mongols lost their empire in 3 unhinged decisions, or click here to watch how Genghis Khan became the most evil man in history.